Okay, let's make a start. Welcome everybody to this meeting of the Audit Committee. My name is Councillor Peter Marriott and I'm the chairman of this committee, and I'm supported this evening by officers Graham Clark, Peter Vickers, who's joined us on Zoom, Gail Beetham, Rosa Plesto, Mellon, Patrick Tweet, and eventually partners from Grant Thornton, we hope will be joining us on Zoom, and Kimberly Sohn. Members and officers, please raise your hand to indicate that you wish to speak, and please keep yourself on mute when you're not speaking. Please can I ask that any questions are kept brief and to the point. If the webcast screen fails, then we will also have to adjourn until we're able to reset the connection. Thank you. Let's move on to the agenda. Item 1 is the minutes. I should like to ask the committee to confirm that the minutes of the last meeting and published on the council website are correct. Thank you, Richard, for all the errors you've noted in the governance statement. Apart from that, are we happy with those minutes? Agreed? Thank you. Item 2 is apologies for absence. Kim.
Thank you, Chairman. We have apologies from absence from Councillor George Wilson, Councillor Michaela Wicks, and we also have Councillor John Gray absent as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Item 3, disclosure of interests. Are there any?
None received prior to the meeting, Chairman.
Thank you. Item 4, questions by members of the public.
None submitted, Chairman.
Thank you. And item 5, question for members.
None submitted, Chairman.
Okay, let's move on to item 6, which is the Audit Committee Annual Activity Report. Kim, I think you were going to outline this for us.
Yes, Chairman, thank you very much. As members will be aware, every year we put a report forward to the committee outlining all the discussions and items that have taken place over the year. You have had the report put into your agenda pack, so I don't propose to go through it, and just ask you if you could note the report and bring up any comments you wish to make. Thank you.
Any comments? Thank you, Kim. Okay, item 7. No, I should ask that work be carried out is noted by the committee. Is it duly noted? Thank you. Item 7, review of the audit terms of reference on pages 11 to 14. Again, Kim,
yes, Chairman. We make a point of reviewing the terms of reference annually just to ensure that they are still fit for purpose. As members will remember, following last year's review, the members did have an informal meeting on the 29th of October and a further meeting on the 26th of November to discuss the terms of reference. It was hoped that following those meetings, the revised terms of reference would be presented to a full council. However, due to pressures imposed by COVID, that did not actually happen. There were very little revisions to the actual terms of reference. The main focus of the conversation had been on linking up the overlaps with value for money ONS. There is obviously a review of the consultation being carried out at the moment, as well as the discussions taking place regarding the review of the ONS committees, and it's hoped that this will pick up the changes to the terms of reference. Again, other than that, I don't propose to go through it and just ask for comments, please.
Any comments? No. No, I understand that Councillor Hyman wishes to speak on this item.
Yes, Chairman.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, we've got. I'm looking at page 11 on the. Is that correct? Of the agenda papers, and at point 2 there, the terms of reference include to review the council's compliance with its own and other published regulations, standards, and controls. Governing financial and general issues and appropriate make recommendations to the council. So that's what we should be doing. Can you explain to me, or assure me, has that been reviewed? Because I think you're well aware that, as a matter of course, I mean, this is Groundhog Day to me. It's an annual thing, and far more often indeed through the chamber. But I raised the issues of compliance with the requirement for Air Quality Action Plan, and compliance with the Habitats Directive, and particularly people over wind judgment. It's my responsibility to do so as a councillor. As I say, it's Groundhog Day, so I'm back again and asking yet again, as it is a place where it should be raised. And I wonder if, Chairman, can you assure me that it has been those issues have been reviewed, where the information would be from the review, and if not, how can residents and members of the public, residents and councillors, be assured of the compliance under the terms of reference? Because obviously our terms of reference are there. It is something that we, as members and as members of the public, can rely upon. And if it's not being carried out, then we need to ensure that there's something within terms of reference that ensure that it is. We need to be able to rely upon the council being held to account and complying with the legislation. So, can you tell me, please, is it your responsibility as chairman to ensure compliance? Have these matters been reviewed? Because this tells me that the terms of reference say that we should review them. If they haven't, what do we have to do with the terms of reference in order to ensure that does happen? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hyman. I can assure you that the terms of reference are continually under review, and there are items in progress at the moment that features in the things that you've been talking about. What specific issues are you would you think are uppermost in your mind when you make this statement?
Well, thank you, Chairman, for the opportunity to come back. Well, obviously, all the way through over many years, and one of the purposes of the Farnham Residents organisation coming to being was because there were many issues which weren't being looked at and dealt with properly in the council, and they are everywhere from staffing issues through Brightwell, through air quality and habitats, many different issues. And the real issue is being able to having a system of governance which ensures that we as members and members of the public are able to get a straight answer to a question. You know, I've addressed this in standards as the committee as well, to little avail. We do need to be able to get an answer. We have had, I know, just over a week ago in the Farnham Herald the week before last, our MP specifically referred to the Air Quality Action Plan, saying that we need to put one together, and we do. It's 15 years now that we have not had a proper Air Quality Action Plan to satisfy the needs of the Environment Act 1995, Section 84 and 86. And with habitats, which comes up again in the, I expected to have something in the annual governance statement about it, actually, because it was mentioned. I'll address that when we come to item 9. But there are issues here where if we as members simply can't get a straight answer to a question, or if we're told that a document exists but we can't get it, which I understand is a situation that you're in, the same as myself, in this regard, then obviously as that is no basis for a system of governance, is it? We have to be able to get a straight answer in order to be able to make our decisions on behalf of our residents properly, and to know that we are acting lawfully. Thanks.
Thank you. Well, a number of those issues that you've raised there have been discussed many times at this council, and I think there's no point in repeating some of the responses to those. I think what I'd ask you to do, Councillor Hyman, is to write specific issues down that you can address to the committee. I mean, I know that we've done this, let's say, as and when you've decided to raise an issue at the meeting, but I think we need I would like a sort of formal representation of your questions, which we can then respond to.
Thanks, Chairman. Well, I've done that many times over the years, and it is a very simple question of where is the assessment then? Where's the compliance assessment? The law is very straight, but I will address it under the item 9 rather than and I think which is where the habitats issue and air quality specifically should be addressed under this item. I think the issue is of whether the system is there in order to be able to ensure compliance. And what I'm saying is that the proof of the pudding shows it isn't, and the proof of the pudding was, of course, certainly in the legal judgment from People Over Wind. Thanks.
Okay, thank you for that. I look forward to receiving your questions. Thank you. I'd have a question myself on this item to do, well, either both the external and internal audits. They imply actions. Kim, now, do these actions, can I find these actions in the action list later on in the programme? Is this are the internal audit actions actually covering things which appear in this section?
I think Gail would be the better person to answer that, Chairman.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, if you're referring to page 12, where internal audit approved the internal audit charter, later on in tonight's agenda, you have the internal audit charter to review. Approve the internal audit risk-based plan, that comes to you at the beginning of March, the March Audit Committee for the start of the year. And looking through the rest of those areas, I can say, yes, we cover, shall I say, the Audit Committee fulfill those particular elements regarding no commissioning work from internal audit, monitoring progress of projects of the audit plan, and consider reports dealing with appointment and management of audit services. The chair and vice chair are consulted on any changes regarding contractor, etc. I'm not sure regarding the external audit, looking at the points, consider whether appropriate accounting policies, that again will be included in the reports that the external audit provide to the committee to give the committee assurance on the arrangements that we have in place regarding your accounts. So having a look through those areas, I think we cover no to receive all reports from the external auditor, which the audit committee do, to consider any concerns arising from the audit or the accounts. Again, that used to come in the external audit findings report, which I think now has been replaced by another report, but the content within that report will be very similar, raising concerns that the external auditors would have.
Okay. I'm just concerned that we might be losing some of the implied actions from these comments.
In my opinion, no.
No. Okay. Thank you very much.
Chairman, I think as Kimberly was suggesting, when we get onto your work programme later on, I think if members sense any gaps between the terms of reference, the items that require an action, and what we've got in the forward plan, well, I think that let's try and identify those and get them into the plan, if that's okay.
Okay.
Yes, thank you, Chairman.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. Yes, thank you. I just want to say a lot of the sort of terms of reference stuff that I've done before with organisations, you cross-cast one to other areas, and it would be quite useful to have that, particularly for new people coming into the audit committee, so they could actually see what impact it has where in those particular documents that they have. If that's too much hard work, I understand that, but it would be good so that we do know that every action is here. Is as a result, it creates a reaction somewhere else, you know, our sort of consideration or notes or whatever that is.
Yes, you want to see the actions closed in a sense. You want to see the progress in some sensible form.
And more widely than that, Chair, which is that when we revise the tour, it's always good to think, well, is there anything else that we should be doing? And if so, what is the impact of that? Because the committee surely is about impact, as that review should lead to certain reactions and things being better or different. So, yeah.
Yes, thank you. Any other comments? No. Okay, thank you very much. In that case, where are we? We are. Ask the committee to consider this terms of reference as a whole and ask comments, and so that we've done that. Good. Item 8. Let's move on to item 8, the external audit plan. So is Paul online?
Yes, I am. Thank you.
Hi, Paul. Would you like to go through your outline?
Happy to. So this is on 2021 audit plan, originally scheduled to come to the council August meeting. So I wasn't proposing to turn the pages, but just to highlight a few things I thought it was helpful just to draw to the committee's attention. So using the page numbers in the pack, I think in the first instance, the most helpful thing is to direct you to page 19, which sets out our headlines and to remind everybody of the scope of our audit. So there are two elements. There's firstly the expressing an opinion on the financial statements of the council and the group. And then the second one is around the forming an opinion on the value for money arrangements. And I'll come on to that in a little bit because that's where there's been a change in approach. But in terms of the financial statements audit, our plan pages 20 to 27, they set out our approach, and in terms of content, it's directing you to the areas that we consider most significant. So they're the things that we're either directed by auditing standards to look at on every audit, be it an audit of a council or a commercial audit, and then other risks that we would identify significant for various reasons. So the ones that we have around land and buildings and pension fund liability, they're considered significant just because of the size of the balances of your land and buildings and the pension liability that you have relative to materiality, the amount that we work to. So they're considered significant, and there's also a high level of estimation in terms of how you arrive at those figures in your accounts that require auditing. So they're the significant areas. Those pages also set out our approach to materiality and explain how we're dealing with the new estimates auditing standards. So that's our approach to financial statement audit. I'll be happy to take a question on that afterwards. And then the other thing that I wanted to draw to the committee's attention was the change in value for money arrangements. So that is set out on page 28 of your pack. So from April 20 onwards now, the value for money approach has changed. So there are now 3 criteria that we look at. So you've got financial sustainability, you've got governance, and you've got a kind of third catch-all, which is called improving economy, efficiency and effectiveness. And where that differs, so there is a lot of draw across from the previous approach in terms of what we looked at, but the difference now is that we don't give a binary opinion. So previously we would say we would either give we would give an opinion if we found any significant weaknesses, we could give a qualified opinion on value for money. That's gone now, but what it's been replaced with is a commentary. So we're required to undertake work, not just in the areas that we would consider to be potential areas of risk. So unsurprisingly for councils in the last few years, we've tended to do quite a lot of work around financial sustainability. And we will continue to do that. But what it means now is we're also required to look at things that we haven't looked at in the past because we don't consider them necessarily to be risks, but we still have to provide that commentary to the council on the arrangements in that area. So it means a slightly wider piece of work for you. And the opinion has been decoupled now from the audit opinion. So we no longer have value for money as part of that audit opinion. We now provide you with a separate report, which is called an annual auditor's report. And that is something that the deadline is now, it's 3 months subsequent from the date of signing. So that timescale has changed as well. I mean, in terms of the actual work that we're undertaking, we, as part of the planning stages, we're required to consider whether there are any areas of significant value for money weaknesses that we've identified. So we have done our planning assessment, and we've taken a view that there isn't anything specific that we want to look at, but quite clearly there are areas of focus that we will be interested in. So, you know, the response to COVID and the arrangements you have in place along there. Obviously, your MTF, and how you're dealing with your financial sustainability, but also potentially some of the governance arrangements that might have come into place around COVID. So was there any temporary override of controls in terms of approving things for the short term? So they're the types of areas we'll be covering on that value for money arrangements work. It is different in terms of the council. We're probably talking to people that we haven't previously needed to engage with as part of our audit, but it shouldn't mean any extra work in terms of you shouldn't be having to create any documents or creating an industry in terms of how we're doing this work. It should be us being able to look at available documentation that you have already. So that's the approach to value for money. The only other thing I wanted to flag was in relation to logistics. So, and on page 30, we've explained that we would be undertaking our audit in August and September. Just to flag, and the committee might be aware of this from any conversations with management, but we've not commenced the audit yet. The intention was that we would start middle of August with an aim to be finishing in September. But unfortunately, due to various issues around our capacity, so in terms of responding, working remotely, having to work on previous audits that have been delayed through various complex reasons, has meant that we've not been able to schedule the audit in time. So we have spoken with management. We've agreed a revised timescale. We felt it was better to, rather than to start earlier and take longer because of the capacity issues, that it would be better actually starting at a later point that was mutually agreed between the finance team and the audit team to undertake the work, and mean we could do it in a shorter period of time that would allow management to obviously deal with the other things that you need to deal with, obviously around some of the budget setting arrangements that you have to cover at this time. So we have we've been obviously in discussions, and we obviously have a committee now rescheduled where we will be aiming to take that completed audit findings report through the process and to get it signed off. So more than happy to take any questions if there are any.
Proposed date now then for finishing this work?
Sorry, I missed that first bit, sorry?
When is the proposed date for you to complete the audit findings report? When will you be providing that report to us?
So we would be looking to start the audit in, I think we'll have availability at the back end of this month. We're looking to do the bulk of the work in October with the idea that we could be able to produce and finalise the audit in November. So the exact date we would need to, you obviously need to make sure it works for the committee, but that's the proposed timescale we're working to.
You're fairly confident of meeting those dates?
That's the intention. If that's what we're working to at the moment, and that's where we have our resources now scheduled to undertake the work.
From what you've told us just now, how much of the sort of a year ago we were looking at the Redmond report implications, how much of that is accommodated now within what you're doing?
I think not a lot at the moment. So there was obviously quite a lot of wide-ranging recommendations from Redmond in terms of the audit fees. There has been support for the system. So the MHCLG has agreed to share, I think, £15 million across those councils in the PSAA contract to offset some of the additional costs arising from new work that are required to do around value for money and estimates. So on some of the fees, there has been support. Obviously, there was talk about a system leader that was first rejected, and now it's been, the discussion is that function would go into the new body ARGA, which has been set up to replace the FRC. Obviously, the timescales that's being talked about for that is several years into the future. So I think some of the Redmond, I think it was a positive report in terms of it identified some of the issues, but I think some of the actions that are required to be taken are things that can't happen overnight. And I think in terms of the short term, if we think about last year, the deadline for the submission for the audited accounts was the end of November. And I think in our view, nothing, and this year it's September, nothing has really changed year on year that would suggest that that earlier deadline is any easier to accommodate. So if we think about some of the accounting issues around accounting for grants and things like that, around the material uncertainties around the valuation of assets, those things are still existed last year, exist this year. We are still working remotely through the audit, which presents its own problems. It just isn't as efficient. And during the year, obviously, when we've been doing other pieces of work, we've had to deal with absences through either from COVID or people having to isolate. And we found that that there's been bigger challenges for our the finance teams that we work with. So the council has obviously invested quite a bit of time in terms of feedback from previous year's audit and some of the reflections on that. And you were able to meet your own deadline for submitting draft accounts, the statutory deadline. But others in the sector have found it very challenging, and we're finding the audits that we have started are just taking longer, and there are bigger challenges. So I think the Redmond will help in its recognition, and some of the challenges that we've seen at the Public Accounts Committee as well are helpful. But yeah, it's not going to solve things overnight.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other questions from members? Jan?
It's just a quick question, Paul. Does the lateness have any implications for the council at all, in terms of not delivering it and when we said we would?
No. So you've met your statutory target in terms of submitting your draft accounts. In terms of the deadline, there is no impact. In theory, the only impact that could occur would be if the audit takes longer and your staff are having to take longer to respond to queries and deal with the audit. Quite clearly, it would mean that they're not able to do the other things that are key parts of their roles as well. Yeah. But I think I'm satisfied from that. We've had this early conversation that we agreed to defer it, and the council was therefore able to consider how you might able to move around your own resources and timescales to mean that there isn't any lost time. So nothing in terms of any statutory requirements, or nothing in terms of that I would believe would be much of a impediment, apart from the fact you obviously just want to get it done and cleared so you can move on to other things. So that's only the real impact for you.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, because it's just going to truncate stuff for the next year, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean,
Yes,
I mean, we're playing catch up. So so all the deadlines were extended. We had, I think we, out of all the suppliers, I believe that we signed the most on time in November, but it was still 60% kind of thing. And there was a lot that have gone in for various issues, due to complexities around the accounts or issues with particular accounting. A number of audits has meant that there are ones that are still previous years that have still not been signed off, and that's been quite an impact. So we still feel that the kind of the issues that impacted last year haven't gone away, which is why we've had a little bit of a struggle to complete the audits in line with this September deadline.
Okay, thanks very much.
Yeah, okay. Thank you, Paul, for that. Please feel free to stay connected if you wish to follow the rest of this meeting. But thank you very much for your input there.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so we are to note the external audit plan as attached to the agenda pack from Grant Thornton. Noted. Thank you. Moving on to item 9 is the annual governance statement. Consideration of potential governance issues, pages 39 to 54. I think Patrick is going to outline this item for us. Patrick.
Thank you, Chair. So I brought the draft in front of the committee previously. During that session, members made a number of recommendations of items they would like to see reflected in the AGS. I've subsequently been away, and in conjunction with officers and senior managers, we've populated it, and I'd like to think that it reflects all of the governance and operational events that occurred in the 2021 financial year. And this is the group's opportunity to comment on it.
I understand that Councillor Hyman is ready to speak. So, Councillor Hyman.
Thank you again, Chairman. Yes, you'll recall, I'm sure, from the papers for the cancelled or delayed August meeting of this committee, the Audit Committee. In that paper, it was version 2 of the annual government statement. And on page 32, which I've got in front of me, it told us that the boundary review was going to be expanded. It said boundary review expand upon habitats regulations, expand upon quarterly reporting, statutory challenges, etc., and other issues. And so I fully expected that to be addressed. Now, having looked at version 3, the only thing out of the list that hasn't been expanded upon in the meantime is the issue of the habitats regulations. Now, obviously, in the face of collaboration with Guildford Borough Council, who are in a similar position, if we go into collaboration, we could have a system whereby we are going to be, because they're in the same position as us at the moment, where the Dilly Lane judgment has been overturned by people over wind ruling. That's settled law now, and the Crondall judgment. We are required to have a complete appropriate assessment, and obviously in the situation we're in, where the Joint Strategic Partnership Board members know and say publicly, and it's on record and webcast, that they are still awaiting the evidence that's required, and they're disappointed they don't have it. They've said that in the last 2 of their meetings quite clearly. In the absence of an appropriate assessment ourselves, and with Guildford in the same boat, there has to be the question of what happens if, in their ongoing review of their local plan, Guildford decide that they are going to comply with the legislation, or if we decide that we're going to comply with the legislation, then it could make things awkward, and obviously no one can turn around to me and say, well, that's not going to happen because no one's ever going to comply with it. I'd challenge anyone to say that. My challenge instead is for the document to be provided for us. Now, you very kindly did approach this with the head of planning, and the head of planning came back to you and said that he was satisfied that our officers were complying, but he didn't provide you with with an appropriate assessment, which is the same story we've had for the past 15 years. And certainly since the 2018 judgment, which settled that Dilly Lane has been overturned, the head of planning quoted, he said, quoting from the National Planning Policy Guidance on the how the people over wind judgment must be interpreted by lawyers and applied by those of us who are non-lawyers, so that we can understand. It confirms that, and I quote, the competent authority must now assess the robustness of mitigation measures through an appropriate assessment. That must now means we've got to change our ways. And of course, all of the authorities who and people who haven't been compliant for over many years, we can understand the difficulty they have of admitting that there's a problem and that they have been not been complying for years. But we must change our ways, and that hasn't been done. We need a detailed, complete assessment of the mitigation. Otherwise, 2/3 of our borough cannot grant assessments until we have revised LPP1 in order to regularise our strategy. And of course, with LPP2 coming through very soon, this is something which is a matter of urgency. So my question to you is that where the head of planning has said, he told you in an email response on the 13th of August that he would take it forward with legal and whatever, rather than simply provide you with a non-existent document or admit that it doesn't exist. He said that he would take it forward. So my question is, how has he brought this forward? Have officers provided you with a compliant, appropriate assessment? And if not, can you please explain to me, as it's your responsibility in audit, why the council is continuing to flaunt the legislation. We know for a fact that document isn't there, I'm sure, unless you've been given one since August the 13th from the head of planning or another officer. But can you please explain to me, confirm whether or not you've been provided with the document required? And it's absolutely clear enough. This is not something you have to go and debate. It's something that's either there or it isn't there. And can you explain why, if officers are quite clearly not cognizant of the requirements to change their ways and conduct this complete assessment, why is it that they are putting me and other people in a position where we read the advice, we read the law, what the law says, and we can go blue in the face, asking a very simple question: where is this document then? Because nobody will answer the simple question: where is it? The simple question: why are we not complying still? Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Hyman. Well, as you remark, I have been in discussion with Zach, and that is ongoing. And I haven't had the assurance of that where that document is as yet, but I'm sure that will be forthcoming. So I can't answer your question directly at the moment.
Could you ask an officer present? Because obviously this has been going on 15 years and our officers do know well about it. It's not as though it's something which has only just come up and we haven't had a chance to look and see. Could you ask any officer, monitoring officer or someone who's present, please, just to confirm whether or not we have this assessment and whether they will provide it to you, hey, let's say tomorrow, and to me, because if not, then obviously we are going to have to start complying with the legislation at some point. And every day further that officers obfuscate, or whatever you might call it, then is another day that Waverley is guilty of certainly the sort of governance that this committee is in place to avoid. Thanks.
Thank you. As I've said to you a number of times, I take this issue very seriously. And I am in discussion with Zach, and we will answer that question that you've raised in due course, but I can't at the moment, and the officers can't either. So if you'd like to write to me with a specific question that I can then take forward, I'd be happy to do that. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Chairman, but the question's there and it's simple. Obviously, you haven't been provided with the document and we have to assume it doesn't exist. Would you please act as though it doesn't exist and insist upon appropriate measures being taken to rectify the situation? Thanks.
I will just repeat what I've just said. I will continue discussions with Zach, and what comes out of that discussion, I'm very happy to share with you. Thank you.
John. I may be, sorry.
Okay. Thank you, Chair. I guess I'd just like to start by getting clarity either from Patrick or maybe from Graham that the governance statement for 2021 remains live for inclusion until such time as it's published. That's correct. So items that have happened since the end of the last council year, we still carry on adding, which doesn't alter what I'm going to say. It just affects whether it's for last year or this current document or for next year. But let me start with quite a large concern I've got. Over the last few months, there's been a lack of risk assessment and analysis being used to support major recommendations that have been brought in front of council. Specifically in July, we had the request for funds to support due diligence for a major property transaction. And then for the proposed formation of a single management team to oversee Waverley and Guildford councils. And then in August, the council was asked to approve the selection of a joint chief executive, or the process for a selection of a joint chief executive for Guildford and Waverley. Now, some risks were identified for these items and some mitigations were proposed, but there was no analysis of probability and severity. And we noted that as a committee for the property transaction because we had a meeting immediately after the meeting to set something in train, shutting the stable door after the horse had bolted. So it makes it hard for members to identify key risks without that and to compare probable outcomes with the council's risk appetite, which we put a lot of effort into creating. And then more recently, various groups in the council have been asked to consider a return to full council meetings in the council chamber. And when the risk assessment for this proposal was requested, we were initially presented with an out-of-date assessment that applied to off-site meetings where social distancing could be maintained. And then that's now been updated. And I actually think I'm reasonably comfortable with the risk assessment process that's gone through. But then the risk map accompanying it isn't our standard 4x6 matrix. It's a 5x5 one that doesn't comply with our risk management policy and the toolbox, which is an excellent document, very simple and very straightforward. So, we can't actually relate the outcomes to the council's risk appetite. And while quantity doesn't always equate to quality, it is interesting to note that Portsmouth City Council's risk assessment for a return to meetings in their council chamber ran to 8 pages compared with our 2. I actually think there's quite a lot of stuff in there I wouldn't have bothered to include, but colleagues have pointed that out to me, so I said I'd bring it up. If I can quote the committee's terms of reference that we've just been through, duties to monitor the effective development and operation of internal controls in the council with particular reference to all aspects of risk management, including Waverley's corporate risk registers. And then if we go to the section 7 of the draft governance statement that we've got in front of us, all councillors and officers are responsible for assuring that risk implications are considered in the decisions they take in accordance with the council's risk appetite, as detailed in the risk appetite statement. And the Audit Committee will continue to review the governance arrangements to ensure that they are fit for purpose in managing key risks. So we know that the strategic risk management is being carried out diligently. We know that. I'm quite impressed with the way we do our strategic risk management. That follows policy and procedure. So it's clear that the council knows how to perform risk analysis, but I would suggest that the annual governance statement for this year needs to flag that major operational decisions are not benefiting from the level of risk analysis that policy requires, and that action needs to be taken to assure that this situation is rectified as soon as possible. That's the big item I've got. If I could just slip in with some smaller points that can be quickly addressed relating to the report. On page 8 in section 5.2, I think it's probably appropriate to flag that there have actually been 2 changes in the structure of the planning committees. So we had an initial temporary one, and then initial temporary reduction to 2 committees, and then subsequently that was made permanent. So it's actually 2 distinct events. So it doesn't change the ultimate outcome, but as pointing out how the governance got to that point, I think that would be appropriate. Point being that the first change was to help manage COVID-induced challenges, whereas the permanent change was a more fundamental way of governance for our planning. So they're two different events with the same outcome in effect. And then also on page 8, section 5.2, the proposed changes to the structure of overview and scrutiny from 4 committees to 2, plus the landlord services panel, I think should also be mentioned. That's a pretty serious fundamental piece of governance change. And then finally, on page 13, this is just a bit of trivia, but I just flagged that on section 11, we can't actually agree that until the final audit report's been issued in November. That's, so, it's just a statement of fact. So it'd be interesting to hear what colleagues have got to say in relation to those comments. But I think I really do find the risk issue pretty serious. We know how to do risk assessment properly in this council, and yet we're getting asked to make rigid decisions without proper assessment and analysis. And I think that's a governance issue. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Would you like one of the officers to respond to the risk questions, and perhaps Peter Vickers or somebody could respond to that now? Peter, would you like to say anything on that topic that Councillor Seaborn has raised?
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, so Councillor Seaborn's raised a fair challenge and question around the use of the risk toolkit, which, as he points out, should be applied in all decisions that we take. That's the point of it being there. So I think it's something the committee should really consider in terms of an action point going forward. One for the AGS itself to note something in there that it needs to be more comprehensive in the application, but also maybe in your work program you might want to come back and look at how the consistency of the toolkit is being used on these decisions. It just feels like there may be the danger that we're possibly, I can't put the reasons to why it hasn't been applied. It may be time pressures that were coming into play. So people were doing what they felt was best at that time. But still, the policy and the toolkit is there, and we should be using it in the way Councillor Seaborn's described it. So it does need to be picked up as an issue. Thank you, Chairman.
Chairman, yes. So thank you, Peter, for that. And yeah, I would agree. I think this committee's ownership of the AGS and its engagement with it is really important. I think if you've got a feel about a particular aspect of it that we need to address, then we need to reflect that in there. I mean, coming back to Councillor Seaborn's first question about the period of cover, I mean, the annual governance statement is a backward look at the end of the year for the governance arrangements before, but like the accounts, if anything significant happened as a sort of a post-balance sheet event, you'd reflect it in there, and I think the same approach would apply to this if there was a major governance concern. We wouldn't necessarily list all of the governance changes that had occurred since the 1st of April in here. So I think the example Councillor Seaborn you mentioned was about the ONS committees. So the ONS committees going from 4 to 2 hasn't been agreed by council yet. That's still subject to approval. The principle was agreed earlier in the year, but there is a detailed report going to work its way through standards soon. So I wouldn't necessarily put that in here. But I think if you felt as a committee, as you've just described, that some aspects of risk, the application, there's some improvement to make, then that does need to be reflected in here, and we would, as Peter said, we would happy to look at that, perhaps citing the as case studies the examples you've given, Councillor Seaborn, in terms of a property transaction and a collaboration, both of which are likely to be, you know, the starts of repeated work streams coming forward. So now's the time, I think, to just get those concerns out on the table, excuse me, and see whether we, see where we did fall short, if we did, in terms of applying our good practice to real life examples. And so, you know, maybe we can do a piece of work there, you know, with Peter and Patrick supporting that, to look at those particular examples in terms of sort of application and the embeddedness of our arrangements, which I'm glad you feel are robust, but of course that's only good if we actually implement them, isn't it? So, okay, thank you, Chairman.
Unsurprisingly, I completely agree with Councillor Seaborn, but I am not quite as eloquent as he is, and that's putting it mildly. I do have some concerns, and this also relates to our own corporate strategy for 2020 through to 2025, where I couldn't find anything, any sort of addendum about relating either to collaboration with other councils, particularly in the way that we're proposing, and secondly, the recent unsuccessful bid that we made that Councillor Seaborn has related to in terms of housing development. I think my concerns and I'm very aware about how good we are at risk assessments, but part of that is to try and hold the horses back. And I do feel in both of these situations that the horse's head has sort of run away with it, and we are literally having to sort of follow up and clear up behind it almost. So my concern around both of those, if we do make things hastily done without that, it's going to be more difficult to get money. But secondly, we have some reputational issues that will align us either with another council and what they're doing, what they've done in the past, but also around this whole thing about you know, how we're using the money that we do have, and as we know, it's very tight. So again, completely in support with Councillor Seaborn. But I would like looking a little bit more forward, perhaps with the executive, perhaps they need a little bit of training or support more in looking at some of these sort of risk elements before they go diving into some of these things. It's not a criticism, sometimes needs must, I understand that. It does seem quite a gap between that original thought and what we're talking about now. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chairman. I've got 2-3 points. Well, we'll count them as we go through. One is whether it would be appropriate, and I think Graham, if you might want to be able to respond to that, whether we need to be mindful in our annual government statement of the changes to the rules that are which have an impact on our financial viability. And I'm thinking and mindful here of the changes to the borrowing requirements from the government, which have a direct impact on our investment strategy to generate income. Now that has an impact on our financial viability. Part of which, as a response to that financial viability, we've had to do some fairly rapid movements our executive had to make some fairly rapid movements in order to look to see whether they can make some savings. And to avoid rerunning the debate, Councillor Floyd-Jacobson, is we've had to possibly run the risk of being not as comprehensive in our risk analysis as possibly we should do. What would be very helpful if, as a sort of a post-decision assessment, we re-look at the way which we have behaved in making those decisions and then doing the risk analysis and bringing out what should be the proper risk assessment of those two decisions, which Councillor Seaborn has referred to. That would be very helpful. But going back to my original question, should we be including in our AGS the impact of COVID and other government restrictions on our financial viability and the actions which we are taking as a organization to address those?
Jim, do you want me to start and then
Yes, please do.
Peter wants to come in, and in fact Paul might want to say something on this, on your last point there, Councillor Davidson. It was referring to sort of financial resilience, and so, you know, setting the budget and the medium-term financial plan and the actual sort of calculations behind our resilience don't really fall within the remit of this committee. You know, we've got value for money scrutiny committee, obviously it's an executive function. However, you know, as we've said throughout the AGS, the governance around our financial management, and as Paul said in the external audit plan, that external look on financial resilience is also important. So there is a role for the committee, but I think we just need to separate out the arrangements for the governance around our financial planning from the actual financial planning itself, which sort of sits quite firmly with the executive as scrutinised by the value for money scrutiny committee. And I think we can do that. So, you know, let's keep, I mean, this is where this initial discussion is really helpful, because we will be bringing back a revised annual governance statement to your, I don't think it's the next committee, but the one that accompanies the accounts, which will now be in November or so, and that will be the one that hopefully will capture some of this thinking. And I'm sure, Patrick, you know, you'd be able to share a sort of a draft of that before the meeting, so that you don't look at it and say, no, that's not really what we wanted. And we can even have an offline session if that helps. As for your suggestion of sort of perhaps retrofitting a more sort of textbook risk assessment, I think you were talking about the two examples that Councillor Seaborn raised, one the collaboration and one the property.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, as part of the exercise that I was suggesting we might want to do, then we could perhaps do that. I mean, on the collaboration report, there was a comprehensive risk analysis done. I mean, there was probably a five-page list. I think what you're saying, Councillor Seaborn, is that it didn't go far enough and comply with our own policy and approach, and map the risks onto a matrix, etc. But there was a risk assessment that accompanied the report. I think that's what you were saying, but correct me if I'm wrong, please.
Well, I can come back. I wouldn't call it what was presented a risk assessment. It was a list of risks. I absolutely don't dispute that at all. And there were a list of mitigations. But at the end of the day, we can't manage every last risk. You know, we've got to know which are the important ones, which are going to hurt us, and which push us to the edge of our risk appetite or go beyond it. And if you don't do the analysis of those risks, you know, this doesn't have to be a monstrous exercise, but it does have to be there, and it wasn't. And the Montague Evans list of risks could easily have had an officer go through them. You know, Patrick's really good at this. He gets pretty close to the truth very quickly. You can whip through that, get in front of the Audit Committee, and then you've got something to work with. And then that can go in front of councillors, and they know that, you know, X, Y, and Z are really important things to worry about, and you know, A, B, and C are down in the noise, and we shouldn't be wasting time with that. Instead of which, you get five pages, and no one knows which is the important, you know, 2 or 3 risks in that lot. Oh yeah, we can use common sense and get to them by ourselves, but people have different perspectives and different tolerances for risk. If it's spelt out to us how the council feels about it, then we all end up on the same page, and you know, you get better decisions. My view. Thank you.
I mean, Chairman, I don't know if Peter or Paul had any comments directly back on Councillor Davidson's points.
I think just from our perspective, I think it's good to be having a conversation like this and evidence of challenge in terms of what goes into the AGS. In terms of as external auditors, I mean, what we're required to do around the AGS is firstly, do you have the things that you're required to have in accordance with the codes, you know, the right sections? And then the second bit is what you've included then consistent with our understanding of the organisation? So, you know, is it factually accurate? So if you said X, Y, and Z, is that actually consistent with our understanding? So you could take a view. I mean, it's obviously the council's document. You could take a view on whether you wanted to add some of those comments around COVID and around some of the financial sustainability, and that would be absolutely fine. From our perspective, it would therefore be, do we agree that what you've included is actually consistent with our knowledge of your position? In terms of the underlying, should you include it, I mean, that would be up to you. We will be looking at financial sustainability. We've taken a view as part of our VFM planning that at this time, we haven't identified a significant, we don't have a concern over a significant area of weakness in relation to financial sustainability. Quite clearly, there was COVID created a financial impact, and there is a gap in terms of the medium-term financial plan in terms of funding that you're looking to plug with savings and income generation. But at the same time, you do have, still have a healthy reserve position, and I think you've demonstrated a track record of, you had a contingency budget with COVID, and you've been able to freeze recruitment. You've had those levers to make some of the decisions to allow yourself to kind of turn off the tap of expenditure. So I think from our perspective, we'll obviously need to make the assessment, but there's nothing jumping out from our planning that we would think you absolutely need to be making specific reference in your AGS on that risk, and not doing so, would not be in line with what is very clearly everybody's understanding of the council's financial position.
Thank you. Well, I think Patrick would like to say a word.
Yes, thank you, Councillor Marriott. I was just going to point out that under section 5.3 of the AGS, we had alluded to the council's financial challenges, and we made reference to the loss of income from both car parking and leisure centres, and we did refer to the revisions to the MTFP that were made in the financial year, but I would be happy to make that paragraph more robust if that's what councillors wanted.
Okay, thank you. Peter, did you wish to make a comment on this item?
I think that's been well covered. Just to cap it, I think it might just do what Patrick suggested and just spell out more clearly the strong governance that was put in place around our financial arrangements over the last 12 to 18 months, because they have been particularly strong and robust, and we should draw that out. That's a very strong governance aspect.
Okay.
Chairman, I do feel that would be helpful because it must be of concern to our residents and our ratepayers that finances, not just with us, but nationally, are at issue. And they would welcome some kind of assurance that as a body, we do have a reasonable grip on resolving the issues which are facing us.
Yes, I agree. I think some of the comments that have been made relate to this major project that are still being involved in, which is something a little unusual compared to the normal things that we get up to in this council. I notice on page 54, item 5.1, changes in governance. We talk about governance boards have been established to scrutinise council projects. Is this the sort of thing where we could have those discussions on the topics that's been raised, the risk element, for example? How are these governance boards set up? And I understand that it's the Audit Committee is effectively the board, the governance board. Are we intending to have separate boards for individual projects, or how is this going to work?
So, Chairman, what that refers to is I take a work programme, for example, of business transformation. So there's an overseeing board chaired by either a director or head of service to bring together the officers that are working on the various work streams. So it's within our project management approach to have a project board so that you have some proper governance and oversight of the projects. So that's what that's referring to, I believe. Patrick, maybe I'll just check in with you as you wrote the document.
Yeah, that's correct, Graham.
So they're sort of operational, Chairman. They're specific to particular projects. So I'm sure members would have heard of the Where Work Happens project, which is basically about how we're going to operate as an organisation with our staff going forward. That has its own board, and again, this is board makes it sound quite sort of grand. It meets on an appropriate sort of frequency, sets itself an agenda, and makes sure it's moving the project along and reviewing back to the PID each time. So it's sort of fairly standard stuff as per our project management governance pack and toolkit that we have. So that's what that's referring to. Chairman, could I just make a sort of well, I don't know if it's going to be a closing remark, but some of the issues that members have mentioned. In para 5.4, at the bottom of page 47, we referred to the Financial Management Code. And I've spoken to you and the Vice Chairman about this. And it's something we're going to be bringing to the next committee meeting of the Audit Committee. And this is a SIPFA framework assurance of good financial management for local authorities. It's very comprehensive, and it covers quite a lot of the things that we've been talking about tonight, including the financial planning and financial management, and how we report and demonstrate that. And I think that will actually help us as we work through that together, help us sort of draw the line between the executive function and the governance functions that might fall within this committee as we go through. There's a really good checklist. Peter's finance team have done an initial self-assessment against the code's criteria and the questions, and we'll be bringing that to probably an offline session. I think we've got one booked actually in October. So we'll be taking members through that and then sort of formalising that through the committee. I think that will sort of help us unpack some of the issues we're talking here, and I think that will link directly into the annual governance statement in future and help inform it. So maybe I can just sort of just sort of lead into that one as a part of the developing work around some of the themes that have come through this evening. Chairman, thank you.
Thank you very much.
That's currently planned for the 20th, if I recall.
Any other comments or questions to raise on the draft report? No, thank you very much. Then, as a recommendation, that we have considered the draft annual governance statement and raised potential emerging governance issues for consideration. Okay, moving on to item 10, the annual internal audit report for 2020-21. Pages 55 to 74. No, it must be later than that. Anyway, okay, it's not quite correct. Gail, you're going to outline this for us.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, this is the annual internal audit report for 2021, and it gives an overview of the work that's been completed within internal audit, and also the work and I suppose work of all officers that have been involved in the audit plan. And you can see that it's in its general format of highlighting the areas as to where work has been completed, giving an overview of the different areas regarding corporate governance on page 65, relating to corporate governance reviews, reviews including more than one service, where it's been across more than one service, what's been applied regarding IT, and also those that relate to not just for corporate priorities, but does include areas relating to our corporate priorities, contract management and financial management. On page 67, it gives an overview as to the opinions that were provided for each of the reports that have actually been finalised and completed. As you can see there, fortunately, we've had none with no insurance, but on this particular year, we haven't had any with substantial, so we're kind of sitting in the middle at the moment. I'm not quite sure as to whether there's a pattern there, but usually we do have more on the substantial side, and that might be due to I think the difficulties that Grant Thornton were saying regarding the remote working, as to whether all the information that the auditors are asking for, as to whether we're getting all the information that's required. But hopefully that'll improve in this coming year. In page 72, again, for the annual performance indicators, thank you for those who responded to the annual audit questionnaire regarding the quality of the service. That also included members as well as heads of service. And the other two that were added back in, I think I'm sure it was Councillor Seaborn last year, mentioned that there was other performance indicators that we'd had in the plan previously that he would encourage to add back in again. So that has been added in on page 72. And I don't think there's much else that I would want to highlight, and if anyone's got any questions.
Thanks, Chairman. Yeah, let me start by congratulating Gail on a very clear report describing a very good year's work. Well done. Key to all of this, though, is learning and improving. So it's the job of the heads of service to use the output from the reports to improve their service areas by implementing recommendations. I wonder if there's any way, not in this report, but going forward, whether it might be possible to demonstrate the amount of time across the business that officers are taking to implement the excellent recommendations that your team put together. It might sound like a big piece of work, but actually I went through all the actions that we've got in the next section and put them in a Gantt chart, and it took about half an hour. And it was a bit of a horror story, quite honestly, because some of them have been out there well over a year. And if that's the picture we're seeing, then this committee might well want to make some recommendations to kick heads of service to deliver their actions rather quicker, because there's no point in having an excellent audit service that turns out its recommendations and actions on time, and then the business doesn't improve on the back of them. So yeah, basically, would it be possible to generate a simple Gantt chart for the audit actions just so that we can highlight which service areas are struggling to close out their actions, and offer them some guidance or some help or some suggestions. Thank you.
I think that's an excellent idea, Councillor Seaborn. I think once an audit review is completed, I believe that part of that process should be that the impacted parties confirm a date when they will be completed. And we as a committee should review any late deliveries, because as you point out, we spend all this money doing an analysis of our weaknesses. If we don't actually fix them, what the hell is the point?
Yeah, I mean, the reality is that all the information is being collected. It's all systematic. It's all there. It just needs sucking out of the reporting and just putting in one simple chart. I apologise. I'm not good at walking and chewing gum at the same time. So I developed my view on things sort of one step at a time. I'm sure more able people would have got to this a lot quicker, but I just think it'd be useful, and clearly colleagues think that's the case as well. So if it can be easily done, I think it shows where the stumbling blocks to benefiting from your excellent work are, and that would be helpful, I think. Thank you.
I'll take that on board. Thank you. Sorry, that is our standard paragraph that we have within our committee reports if there are no direct implications regarding diversity. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, agenda item number 11 is regarding agreed audit actions. And as councillors have already conveyed, the dates that are agreed regarding audit recommendations are actually allocated by the heads of service. They have to consider the resource implications that recommendation, or sorry, that action will take, and it's then discussed within their teams. When the auditor completes a review, they have it with the direct person that they had as main contact, and also the head of service would then in effect sign that report off, agreeing to those agreed actions. I think one thing we have to consider, as we are aware, COVID has affected everyone, and our heads of service have had to react in different ways to deal with that. And taking Councillor Seaborn's previous point on board, they have agreed to it, so therefore they should action it. But I think there are cases where we have to actually put things into priority to ensure that basically services are delivered, and we have to try and use our resources the best way we can in the circumstances.
Chair, if I may have a question, please. Thank you. Thank you again. I echo again what Councillor Seaborn said about the report and all of this. I love this. What really concerns me most is the sea of red. Actually, I'm not as bothered about the process, because the process is a means to end to see, are we dealing with what we should be dealing? But the sea of red does concern me. And is there with stuff within there that we have reputational issues, or we have other issues, or financial issues? And I think so, as well as the excellent idea from Councillor Seaborn, I think what I'd love to see is actually what of these, of this massive red in some parts that we have, do we have some real issues? Because actually that's what we should be focusing on. I mean, we've all done this stuff. You stick a date down and something happens like COVID, something minor, and it throws you back a year. But I'm sure there must be some stuff in here which is a real concern, or perhaps needs to be recategorized. Perhaps the RAG thing needs to be looked at. Is it really, bearing in mind you haven't done it for a year or whatever, is it actually a red, or is it more of an amber? So anything like that would be useful to sort of allay those sort of concerns. Thank you.
A very valid point. And that is one of the things for this one today. It is probably the longest one we've ever had regarding outstanding actions. And I must apologise, because it's actually longer than what it should be, because there is a lot of these that have now been implemented. And that's, I was going to ask the chairman as to whether he wanted me to go through them line by line as to which ones have been implemented.
Oh, Chairman, can I make a general point? And this isn't good, and there are too many on here, and members are absolutely right, and we need to refocus our attention, our managers' attention, on the priority for implementing in the timescales that they agree. As Gail rightly said, these timescales aren't imposed. We do challenge them. Gail runs every audit report past me before it's signed off. Sometimes when I see timescales that have been proposed and actions that have been proposed by managers, I say that's insufficient, or that date's too far out, we need to pull it back, and then we have a conversation. So firstly, just linking it to the previous item, because what you're seeing here is the exception. The vast majority of audit recommendations do get implemented on time. All you're seeing in this report are the ones that either haven't been by the deadline or look like they're about to. So the ones that have got less than a month between the date of the audit committee and their scheduled time. So Gail will give a general update. I didn't sense an appetite to go through every one, so we'll do a general update in a sec on those. But so you are seeing here the sort of the exceptions and what Councillor Floyd Douglas asked for, which is which areas should we be concerned about? Well, actually, it's the ones on here. All the others have been implemented. So out of all of the other internal audit reports that Gail and the contractor have done, that they're all okay, and they're kind of you don't see all of those other than in the annual summary. But there are some areas of concern in here that we do need to look at. And but some of these, I mean, Gail perhaps give an example of one where the deadline is the end of September, so it's not overdue yet, but it has been implemented, or it will be. So you can eliminate some of these, but it will still leave too many, and there shouldn't be this many. I was talking to Tom Horwood last week about this, because it came to management board and we were concerned that we need to just stress to our managers the importance of implementing these on time. So it's if you're concerned, that you're absolutely right to be concerned, because the list is too long.
It seems that a few are linked and have been for some time to the Horizon planning system. That seems to be an ongoing problem.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah. I mean, I started off being horrified with the number of actions in the report, but it's absolutely, it's been identified. On closer inspection, many of the long overdue items are actually nearly complete and accompanied by requests for extensions. And I'm okay with supporting what I've seen in that. So when we come to the vote, I'll be supporting those. And many of the actions are not yet due, or only just due. But the group of outstanding actions that concern me most relate to the audit of safeguarding. Most of the items are high risk and they've not yet been started. So this is a case where I think we really should be concerned. And from my perspective, I think it'd probably be appropriate for this committee to, well, I'd go right the way to the relevant director, which I guess is Annie Wrighton, saying that we want to see these actions largely closed out by the time we have the November meeting, or a very good justification for why things aren't going to take, why things need to take longer. I'm a school governor. We've got our first governors meeting of the year in 2 days' time, and there'll be an hour spent going through safeguarding for all the new members of the government. So, one of the actions I think was to make sure that all members were up to date on their safeguarding training. well, my little junior school can do it, my infant school, sorry, and perhaps the council school. I don't know. It'd be interesting to see what other people think. But that, you know, that was the one item that really stood out. And I thank Gail for including it, because most of the actions aren't actually due yet. But boy, oh boy, are they important. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. I agree wholeheartedly with those comments. That's very relevant.
Yes, I was just going to say, yes, taking on board the safeguarding one. I know that the safeguarding board, the recommendations were going to be put to the safeguarding board, because obviously it wasn't just within the service area, it's obviously across the board. And therefore, those recommendations, as you will see at the actual exit meeting for the report, was the 27th of July. And therefore, a lot of the recommendations, there are some that have already been implemented, which aren't on this schedule. But I felt it was prudent to have all the recommendations that hadn't yet been implemented or due to be implemented by the 30th of September. Because I think there is one other recommendation, and that's actually revising the terms of reference of the actual board, which isn't due until the early next year. So as an example, they're not all on here. It's those that are actually outstanding or due within September, and also not those that have already been implemented even before the report went to final. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, we have the progress on the audit plans for 2021 and 21-22. And as you can see, the majority of there's 96% of the plan was actually completed within the time frame. And I must admit, I personally have let the team down because it's my review that didn't achieve that 100%. Unfortunately, my resources were needed elsewhere to deal with other issues. And as you can see here, where we have had reviews relating to limited assurance, the committee have got the overview of the key observations and the key summaries of the issues that were identified. And within the actual the rolling programme on page 129, I must admit there was actually notes page 132, where actually the number of days for those that are eagle-eyed, I'm sure Councillor Seaborn had noticed on page 132, where I had 135 days were allocated to the partnership. It was actually 137. Because at the bottom of page 133, I added in an extra 2 days. Again, extra 2 days were added in due to the timing difficulties that they were trying to obtain information from more than one party to complete the audit. So I do apologise for that. And on does anyone have any questions on the 2021 audit plan before I move on to the next one?
Chair, for me, I mean, I'll touch on it, but I prefer just to touch on the two together. So this is, again, it's how we use the data overall. So if you want to carry on, and then we'll.
No problem, thank you. For the plan for this year, we have had quite a few reviews started, and one of the reviews, which I think the Audit Committee, I will point out to the Audit Committee, is the post-business grant compliance. That report has now been issued to us as a final. It's still to go through our process regarding our signing off, but that review was relating to the COVID grants that we distributed on behalf of the government, and the assurance opinion that we were given was substantial on that. So I thought that was worth sharing with the committee of the work obviously the team had done to make sure we did lots of pre-checks before we actually dished out any of the COVID grants. So the governance around that was obviously given high regard by the auditors. Responsive repairs review in page 144, that's now been issued as final. And the debt management review, we've increased that by an extra 3 days because we want to ensure that we have got good control mechanisms in place because we're now using a third party to assist us on our debt recovery. And it was interesting that Councillor Seaborn picked up on risk management because one of the reviews that I've actually proposing to add to the audit plan, which is on page 146, is risk management, and that's trying to look at it across the board, aligning in with our corporate priorities, our corporate strategy, and ensuring that we are actually applying it consistently our risk management process. I think that's all I've got for that. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. So the 2020-21 internal progress report, I found it really useful to have the key observations and issues included for the audits, the reports that you've done, because I think it's the first time we've actually had that level of detail. We asked, I don't recall going through it before, but there was a lot there though. And so I looked at it and I thought, well, what can we do with this? It provides much more colour than just knowing how many actions were identified and provided. And it provides us with assurance that audits are actually generating meaningful output. So can I ask if Gail or anyone else is actually aware of any schemes for analysing the actions arising from local authority internal audit reports? Seems to me that we're getting a wealth of data here with which to analyse the health of the organisation. But the findings are being essentially used in a tactical way rather than a strategic way. So we effectively get a list of symptoms and the officers address the symptoms rather than drilling down to root causes across the organisation. So, one big picture. So it's a bit like, we're prescribing aspirin for a headache rather than understanding what caused the headache in the first place, and then eradicating the problem through surgery or a change of lifestyle. So, lots of fixes. But actually, are there systematic big things that can easily be sucked out of this if the appropriate scheme's in place? The internal audit reports clearly describe actions and they assign priorities and they assign risks. So a lot of it's there. If we had a simple coding scheme that could be found, ideally, don't want to reinvent the wheel if possible, but otherwise created, so that each action is attributed to a type of cause, such as inadequacy or lack of policy or procedure, failure to apply procedure, insufficient numbers of staff, insufficient training, etc. Then it might be possible to build a robust picture of organisational shortcomings in general, which can then be addressed and used as a powerful driver for continuous improvement. So in 2021, there were 123 actions reported during the year, according to your report. So, it's clearly all being tracked. And of course, we've got lots of historical data as well from previous years. So, Waverley's got a massive data from which it could develop a picture for areas of improvement at a strategic level, if a suitable coding scheme can easily be found and applied. So, it's an observation. I don't recall going through each of the actions before from the reports, and just looking at it, I was actually overwhelmed. Crikey, there's a lot of data here. What do I do with it? And I suddenly thought, well, if it is coded like that, we can actually suck out some really good stuff for continuous improvement. And I didn't pick up the point that you suggested Mr. Smarty Pants might have honed in on, but on the 21 to 22 plan on page, on item 9 on page 154, we seem to be missing a budget balance number. So question, is the budget on track for this year?
Yes, the budget actually is on track. Committed in salaries costs is actually 55,500. So I've got 98,500 left in my budget at the moment. I must apologise actually, because these my reports were not updated between the audit chairman's briefing and tonight's meeting due to me not being available. So I do apologise for that. And Councillor Seaborn, if I can just convey, the reason that you have got the detail is when there is a limited assurance review, that is when you have this detail. So previously we've generally had more no assurance and very limited cases of limited assurance. It's usually above that level. Hence my comment at the start of the meeting.
Chairman, can I just pick up on something Gail mentioned around the business grants, COVID business grants? It was something the Audit Committee mentioned quite a few months ago now about just keeping a check on it, because, you know, very short notice, the government was coming up with schemes from April last year with, you know, tens of millions of pounds for Waverley to pay out in thousands of different grants. And the committee quite rightly said, you know, when we get towards the end of this, we want to have a look at that. And I think it was very reassuring that Gail's sort of external internal audit on that whole function across the months came up with substantial assurance. I was very pleased with that, because and credit to Peter and Walter Stockdale and the team, because what the audit showed was that the controls that they had taken, you know, a bit of time to put in at the start, sort of were robust and they paid off. A lot of councils, you know, time was more important than the control. They rushed out. They had a few issues to sort as they went through. They had some payments going to the wrong people, some fraudulent ones. So it was reassuring to see that we got the balance right between getting money to businesses very quickly but also looking after the public money. So, you know, well done to Peter and the team.
Yes, it's been good. Is that almost finished now? Is it some?
So since last April, we've run, I think, 10 different grant schemes for various sectors and time periods, you know, all of those tiers and things like that seem a distant memory. Actually, it was only in November and December that we had tiers running. We have 2 schemes running at the moment. The Restart scheme, which is tailing off, and we'll be sending in our final reconciliation on that. And we have the additional restrictions grant, which we're targeting. We've just been awarded a 3rd tranche of that funding. So we're targeting businesses that sort of have a bit of a long COVID effect still. So even if they're up and running, businesses in supply chains where the industries are still suffering. So anything in some of the hospitality, the events, the airline industry, those sort of travel industry, even if they're back up and running, the time lag and that you know, what we're calling sort of a long COVID impact is still hitting the bottom line to some of those businesses. So the idea of the grant is to keep them going until the long COVID's gone and they're fully trading again. So we're still working with the economic development team to try and target that money. We've got about £1 million left. But I think we've paid out about 35-40 million over the last 18 months.
Is that still managed through? Is it Reigate?
So Reigate since January have been running our business grants, and that's worked really, really well for us. So yeah.
Thank you. Any other comments on observations? No, thank you on that item, Gail. I think there is a recommendation that we note the content of the audit progress report as attached. Noted. Agreed. Thank you. Okay, item 13, fraud investigation summary. Again, Gail to outline.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, this covers the whole of 2020-21 and the first quarter of 21-22. And on Annex 1, the committee will be able to see that the total value of savings identified, again, we are still complying with the Cabinet Office savings figures, and you can see there it's over £1 million for last year. And from that, we were able, you can from the chart, you can see there was 4 properties that we recovered and were handed back and put back into housing stock for social housing fraud, and also 2 relating to right to buys. And the last more significant one is where a succession was not allowed due to the criteria to obtain that succession not being applicable for the circumstances. On Annex 1, we can see at the moment the financial savings are just under 100,000, which relates to 2 properties, one being returned back to stock and the other where a housing application has been rejected due to their circumstances. The applicant not meeting full criteria for our housing register. And as I say, it always looks very simple when it's simple figures on this chart, but the amount of work that actually goes into the investigation of each of these cases is obviously, it is time consuming, but we do have a very efficient investigator. And I think in previous audit committees, again, it might have been Councillor Gray or it could have been Councillor Seaborn. At the bottom chart is obviously identifying the resources that we actually use. The cost of those resources totally outweighs the benefits that we actually achieve. And more, the bigger scheme of things, what it does do is actually convey to people out there that actually we will not tolerate people abusing our systems and gaining housing when they're not entitled to have it, or not using the property the way it should be being used. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. I guess it's been more difficult this last year or so with COVID, having to take that into account on these issues.
Yes, it has, because obviously we've had to ensure that when we are carrying out any investigations, we're following the COVID rules, and in some ways it may in actual fact not been a benefit to us in some ways, but neighbours are being more aware of who is actually living next door when it's not the person that should be living next door. So there have been restrictions, but I think there have, in some ways, there has been some advantages as well to that.
Okay, thank you.
I was going to say, Chair, I think to be congratulated, because I think it's an amazing achievement, really, given the sort of the impact on resources that you've had. So I think it's terrific. He's obviously on fire, isn't it? The investigator that you're using.
I think it does come down to the fact, he is an experienced investigator, and obviously I support him, but I personally, I don't get too involved in the work that he does, because obviously I wouldn't want to impede on his investigations, but he does work, as he's dealing with housing tenancy fraud, he does work very well with the housing tenancy team. And again, the cooperation that they provide and support him, but again, they support them in cases that they have got that maybe are not quite tenancy fraud, but could naturally, in the end of it, result in that, because the initial complaint that they receive, when it's then looked at more in detail, there is something else behind it.
Any more questions? No, thank you, Gail. It's recommended that we note the contents. Sorry, not the contents. We note the success of the fraud investigation activity. Agreed? Agreed. Okay, moving on to item 14, which is the Internal Audit Charter. Back to Gail again.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This report, generally, the Audit Charter normally comes a bit earlier to the Audit Committee, but obviously, as we know, things didn't happen as we always plan. So yes, this is just an annual review of the Audit Charter. There hasn't really been anything that has changed in it since the previous one, but it's just gaining Audit Committee approval that they're still content with the contents.
Any questions? No. Thank you, Gail. Then in that case, we ask the committee to agree any recommendation. We endorse the Internal Audit Charter. Agreed? Agreed. Okay, now we're on to the item 15, the recurrent annual work programme. Okay, that's Gail, you cover that, I guess.
I don't think there's any changes that's really required on this, unless maybe external audit may have any changes that wish to make, and I'm not sure whether any of the members have questions.
And you had a
So Chairman, since this was pulled together, we've had our meeting with Grant Thornton, so we are going to have to shift a couple of the dates here down.
Yeah.
So the external audit annual letter and the where are we? Oh, and we'll need to put the accounts in as well in November. And then next year, at the moment in July 22, we've got annual governance statement and statement of accounts for approval. They'll be done in the September round because the government have changed the regulations now and made them end of September rather than end of July. For next year, they did it for a 2-year period. I don't know what they'll do after that. So I can give Kimberly the details, but just to let you know now.
thank you. So that'll be reviewed, so revised at the next audit meeting.
Yes, yeah, that's fine.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments?
Chairman, just to point out as well, coming from this meeting, I will discuss with officers to include a session for us to look at risk analysis and also a session for us for the financial management code, which I believe we're including in the October informal, yes?
Yes, so after the informal, it will come to the next formal. Yeah, thanks, Kimberly.
Okay, thank you, Kimberly. So can I ask the committee to note the work programme? Agreed?
With the amendments, yeah.
With the amendments, yes, thank you. Okay, now. Do we have anything to discuss in exempt, Graham?
Chairman, I have a couple of items which I think probably would be best handled within the exclusion of the press and public.
In that case, do we read out this recommendation? This one, yeah. That's okay. That pursuant to Procedure Rule 20 and in accordance with Section 100A(4) of the Local Government Act 1972, the press and public be excluded from the meeting during consideration of some following items on the grounds that it is likely, in view of the nature of the business to be transacted or the nature of the proceedings, that if members of the public were present during the items, there would be disclosure to them of exempt information as defined by Section 1001 of the Act, of the description specified in the appropriate paragraphs of the revised Part 1 of Schedule 12A to the Local Government Act 1972 to be identified at the meeting.